Hi, I'm Richard Hill, the host of eComOne. Welcome to episode 168. Today's guest is somebody who a lot of you guys will know if you've been on the podcast, Carrianne Dukes, our senior marketing manager here at eComOne. Now, we get asked a lot about the value of podcasting and the value of partnerships, and for us, it's been instrumental in our growth as an agency, and I know it's been instrumental in a lot of our clients' growth with their stores. But in this episode, Carrianne steps through booking 168 guests on this podcast and the why, the how, and some of the inner sort of secrets of getting some very big stars in your industry on the podcast and on your potential podcast. The sort of 3-4 step process of launching a podcast, the things you need to think about launching a podcast. But really we focus very deep on partnerships and the benefit of partnerships. Now, partnerships for me and Carrianne is literally our day-to-day. We spend 3-4 days a week talking to our partners, liaising with potential partners, and Carrianne steps through her process over the last 3 years, looking after our sort of core partner network. So if you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and follow wherever you're listening to this episode. So without further ado, I'll give you Carrianne Dukes. We're recording, Carrianne. Isn't this exciting?
Very exciting.
3.5 years we've been doing this podcast together, but maybe some of our listeners might not know your contribution, shall we say, to this podcast. It's been phenomenal. Obviously, it's been a 3.5-4 year journey almost with the podcast, but we'll get into that in a moment. But I think before we do, it would be great for you to tell our listeners and viewers how you got into the world of e-commerce.
So I actually started getting into e-commerce, probably really the push was about 2 years ago, I would say, when I shifted from marketing B2B to really focusing on the sort of e-commerce side. So I started my degree 7 years ago, so doing a marketing management degree, and we learned obviously the complete theory. And then I started here in 2019 as a PPC exec, which is pretty wild, really. And then obviously started building sort of search ads for clients on the client side. Yeah. Then I started doing the SEO side, which was really fun. So doing sort of Meta. So back in the day when it was really huge push on Meta for a local big client that sort of had over 200 locations, which was obviously really good fun. And it was great learning point as well for me being new in the industry. And then I started doing all sort of general marketing. But yeah, like I said, really the push has been the past couple of years on the sort of brand side of the business, the building the e-commerce sort of ecosystem that we have of all the partnerships, making sure we protect the brand, we grow the brand, and also the event side as well. So getting clients and prospects into the building to help educate them. So yeah, it's been a great, I would say, couple of years really in the e-commerce side, sort of building my own knowledge and also helping our clients grow with the sort of partnerships that we've built.
So I think we're sitting here on episode, 168. Obviously that's 168 people that you have booked and organised and rallied round and organised for this podcast. And that's just a slither of the role. As you said, you've covered quite a lot of areas of the business and then sort of landed in your sort of flow, I think, on the partnership side and the podcast side. They obviously work very hand in hand, working with. And I think some people ask, I got asked this probably 4 days ago, what did you get from the podcast? It's like, well, and I think people want that instant gratification. We turn an ad on, we want a return, and I get that. But I think, what would you say, what is the importance to e-com store owners that are listening and marketeers are building strong, solid relationships in their industry?
Yeah, I think it's completely unrealistic for people to expect to get a return straight away, especially with podcasting. It is such a long-term strategy. Yeah. And I always look at it as we've got two sort of main objectives from the sort of podcast. So the first one is obviously it's more thought leadership that I look at it as. So getting the team, getting yourself on the podcast to obviously learn from other people, but also elevate us in our brand as well to give us that sort of step above. And then the secondary, that comes down to the sort of sponsorship that we get, also the sort of clients that we get from the podcast, and just the learning point. But the most important part, and our podcast has allowed us to do this, is building those relationships with our partners. So we constantly get our partners in, which obviously is fantastic. We learn from them. They can talk about the latest updates in their sort of software, and also they can meet the team. But building a relationship is absolutely critical. It's basic human psychology that people want to help people that they like. So obviously if they like you, they're more likely going to refer you leads or look after your business or sponsor you for events. For example, I did a panel with James White from Klaviyo probably about a month ago now at the eCommerce Expo, and he said for every 10,000 agencies he only has 10 leads to be able to distribute them to. So how does he differentiate when there is so many agencies are so similar? And it's probably likely, and he probably would admit it, actually, it's the ones he likes the most and he's got much more of a deeper relationship with.
Well, before we hit record, I asked Carrianne who her three favourite partners were.
No, we didn't.
Now, we've done 168 episodes. That's just the podcast, let alone the probably circa 100 tech partners that we have. But obviously, we have a core set of tech partners. But obviously, in any industry, any niche, if you're listening to this as a store, you're thinking, well, how does that relate to me potentially? And I think the reality is, if you're running a store, you have tech partners as well as we have tech partners that we recommend. If you're running a store, what review system are you using? What relationship do you have with them? What shipping configuration system do you use? What, and the list goes on. And the agency partnership relationships. So, I think relationships where you're selling a product, you're buying that product from somewhere, that relationship and partnership with that manufacturer, supplier, whether that's a factory in China or your mate round the corner who you're buying things from. But quite often that's how quite a lot of these things start. We start buying a few bits off X, Y, and Z, and then you grow, they grow, and their trust builds, and they want to do more business with you, and they want, they trust you, over time the type of business and people you are. We have some very interesting conversations about a lot of people in the industry, don't we? All light-hearted, but ultimately, being a good firm to work with, a trusted partner, is absolutely key, and that takes a bit of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it takes. If you want those meaningful relationships, you've got to be willing to put in the time and to put in the resource. A lot of the partnerships that we built, especially at the start, we didn't know much about. And when we're referring sort of clients over to them, we've got to be able to trust them so that they deliver for our clients, because at the end of the day, our clients trust us. And if we refer them over and they have a bad experience, that can reflect badly on us. And that's just dangerous for an agency, for e-commerce. When as well, e-commerce have got so many stakeholders that they've got to answer to, even their customers. So building relationships with their customers is so important, especially in the industry that we're in and the sort of climate we're in, where sort of people are sort of costing, really pinching their pockets and cutting down on costs. If you've got a sort of product that is similar to so many other out there and price is the only differentiating factor, you could be in trouble. But if you've built that brand and you've got that relationship with your customers, they're more likely going to be loyal to you, and it makes a huge difference.
I think that is so key, because the reality is, whether it's a tech partner, platform, supplier, there's so many out there. So there's a lot of choice, and I'm thinking at the moment I've got a particular potential tech partner, and he must have emailed me 30 times in 3 weeks. I'm not exaggerating. If you're listening to this, I won't mention his name. You seem like a nice chap. Your tech looks okay, but you just need to slow down. You're just pushing too hard. We're not going to introduce your tech to all of our business till we've properly vetted it, checked what we can, tested it on an environment. It's just having, some people's expectations are just a little bit, shall we say, excessive or a little bit unrealistic. It doesn't mean he hasn't got a brilliant tech, but there's a process and the time and it takes time, doesn't it?
It's like dating though, isn't it? Like if you're dating someone, you're not going to spam them 30 times a day. And if you do, well, you need help.
It's not going to go well, is it?
You want to get to know them, sort of build that relationship. And obviously over time, hopefully it gets stronger opposed to break down.
Yeah. So obviously, like we said, we've got 168 guests on the podcast and, and many relationships that we've built, you've built, as in the agency. But along the way, I'm sure there's been a few, if you like, mistakes, and learnings. What advice would you give to the guys learning from some of the mistakes you've made?
Yeah, there always is, isn't there? There's always mistakes, and that's a fun part of like learning and growing as an individual. But yeah, I remember when we first started forming the sort of partnership ecosystem, you put, I think, as one of my rocks, like build sort of 20 partnerships. And I was like, well, what the hell does that even mean? So the biggest mistake I 100% think that I did is I built too many too quick. It was too overwhelming for myself, for the team. Like you say, there's so many out there, and it's like it was constantly jumping on calls, learning sort of like a 30-minute snapshot about them. So for example, say reviews, so 5 review partners, and then obviously having all that to distribute that to the team. Well, how do they know who to refer to when they're so slightly similar? Like we only have like obviously a set of clients. We don't have 1 million clients for all these tech partners. We've got to make sure that the sort of partners that we align with, like you say, they match our values and they're actually useful instead of just a waste of time. Because some people, they know how to sell a dream, but it's not about that. It's about delivering on the dream.
Yeah, it's that long-term relationship at the end of the day, isn't it? If we're recommending something that's clearly just a commercial decision, but not the right decision, it's it's a very close-knit industry. If people get found out for recommending something for maybe a commercial reason, as opposed to an actual right, that's actually they're a really good bunch of people.
Yeah,
that's really important, isn't it? But ultimately, the tech is priced correctly. It does what it should do. It's scalable. It works with the different obviously we've got a lot of clients on Shopify, etc., and and all the different platforms. But we've got certain platforms that we've got more clients on, etc. BigCom, Shopify, Woo, Magento, or Adobe. So there's a lot to take into consideration, not just this guy's really great, and X, Y, Z. So it's taking that into account, isn't it? It's so easy to sort of get sold the dream. We go to these expos, and there's 15 suppliers, if you like, potential suppliers, whether that's a product or a tech. But it's doing that sort of like you going back to that dating. It's like it's almost a bit too good to be true. First date. He said, "Hang on a minute, let's maybe just ask a couple of other people that are using this technology or have bought from this supplier." Oh, okay. Yeah, he told me that, but he didn't actually do that, and doing a bit more of a recon around that supplier. So podcasts, we touched on that. Obviously, crazy amount of experience, from launching a pod, from a seed of an idea, to go, might sort of go, I think we're going to do a podcast, Carrianne. And you're going,
that's why I'm now grey in 3 years.
And then fast forward to today. We've got our own. This is another one of our studios in our HQ in the Mosaic in Lincolnshire, and then we started, in the office which was upstairs in this building, with a little microphone, and then we've scaled it to what it is now. But obviously, a lot of e-com stores may be thinking of publishing a podcast. Should they go for it? Should they do it?
I'm going to do that classic sort of marketer answer, isn't it? It depends. So I think a podcast is incredible. It's been incredible for us, and it is incredible as a sort of medium. But it just depends what's your why, what's your objective with the podcast, and you really need to sort of nail that down. Because one of the things, obviously, that we did, which we found out that sort of hindered the sort of growth probably in the first year, was we didn't niche down enough. It was too general. So that obviously put us back in the sort of growth of what we wanted to achieve. So I think podcast is obviously a great medium. I think you learn a lot from it. You can build a lot of relationships. And e-commerce, think of if you've got a retailer and you're selling, I don't know, say clothes, for example, you can get your suppliers on there, build better relationships. You could get customers on there. Imagine that they would really become advocates for your brand. You could get tell the stories of the people that work behind the sort of the website, and people will form those relationships. It's a lot of opportunity, but you've got to remember your why, and you've got to remember what is your objective of the podcast for how you shape it. And also you've got to think, how much can you commit resource and money and time to, because it takes a very long time. And it's one of those things that I've spoken to a couple of other people that are wanting to grow podcasts, and they're like, well, why have I not grown enough yet? And I'm like, you're literally like 3 months in. Like, get obsessed with the content, the quality of the audio first, and then look at the numbers much later on, is what I think.
It's an interesting one, because we've had quite a lot of podcasters on the podcast, and a few people have said to me, not a lot happened until we did 100 episodes.
Yeah.
When somebody said that to me when I'm on episode 14, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, sort of thing. But it's sort of true. I think that number's, sort of a made-up number, but it's, doing 3 or 4 or 5 times. Like, go to the gym 6 times. It's not really going to, it's not going to make too much difference. You're going to start to get a bit of pace, but that consistency, that sort of commitment. But like you say, it's like, what is the ultimate aim? And you might not know straight out the gate, but ultimately, like you say, if you're building relationships, which it comes back to that initial question, you're building relationships in your niche. Mostly good things come from that. If you're you sort of know what you're doing as a person, and when you're interviewing them, sounds like I'm saying that myself, but ultimately, you're building relationships with people that you can help. They can maybe help you, and who knows what comes from that quite often. But usually great things come from good conversations. I think we're both sort of on the same page with that, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. And we've had that with a few of our guests. Like, we've had them on the podcast, and then they've been fantastic, and we've got them in front of the team, and then also educated the team. So we didn't initially have that sort of goal in mind when we got them on the podcast, but because we built that relationship and we was like, actually, this is really relevant, then the whole team benefited from it as well.
Yeah. If you just think, listeners, if you spend the next 20 weeks interviewing 20 key people in your industry, that probably connects, half that industry, but what you will then learn from speaking to those experts that have spent, whether it's the last 5, 10, 20 years, but 20 conversations, collectively hundreds of years worth of expertise, but areas that maybe slightly connect to your business that you didn't have that knowledge in. You're taking that back to your business and educating the wider team, making change within the store because you've now decided that we're going to focus on this, and we found a new supply for this because I spoke to such and such. I went to an event, got introduced to a guy, and this influencer messages and mentioned us on this. And then it just connects, and it's surprising who you get to know, and I think what I would add to that is it's like we're doing this podcast now, but what people won't have heard is the 15-minute chat we had before and the 15-minute chat we had afterwards. And I think to be able to get 45 minutes with somebody that's really influential in your space, but you're getting them on the podcast, but then you can have a chat with them about anything. And some of the conversations we've had that you've engineered, if you like, by getting them on, we've got a company coming on in a couple of weeks, a really, a brand that we would absolutely love to work with. And that's not the reason we've got them on, but just the way they operate is just so smooth, and it's the sort of people we want to work with. And they sent us a gift, haven't they?
Yeah, they have.
And it's just like, to work with and be around people that are, not just because it's set as a gift, but we saw the owner of the business do a talk, and we were both very inspired by her talk. I was like, we need to get her on. She's just great, and get that company on. I just wanted to introduce you very quickly to our sponsors, Pricing. Now, Pricing is a competitive price tracking and monitoring software that can dynamically change a product's prices on all sales channels. They work with brands such as Samsung, Sony, Suzuki to increase their online revenue. Now, if you run Google Shopping, which I know a lot of you absolutely do, this software is absolutely key to accelerating profits. One of the reasons I recommend Pricing to my clients is because you can find out your competitors' pricing and stock availability all in one simple to understand dashboard, giving you a huge competitive advantage. Now, if you have any inquiries and questions about this software, or you're ready to get cracking, we have worked out a very, very special deal for our listeners where you can get a free month's trial and then 25% off for the first 3 months. Head to eComOne.com pricing and complete the inquiry form, and we will connect our listeners to the Pricing team. Right, let's head straight back to the episode. So, okay, I'm convinced. I'm sitting here 168 weeks in, or a bit more than that. But what would be the sort of, the listeners are thinking, right, okay, let's have a go at this podcast thing. What would be some of the first steps they need to think about launching a podcast?
I think it's deciding your sort of format. So is it going to be an interview format like we have here? Is it going to be just you jumping on and talking about a certain subject and really sort of nailing that? And also the commitment that they can do. So can they do one a week? Can they do one a month? Obviously, it's very time consuming, but you need that consistency to grow. And for your listeners to be like, oh, it's Monday at 6 a.m. That new podcast will be live. I'll listen to it. So that's absolutely critical. Like in anything, when you want to grow in marketing, consistency is the most important thing. And then also the equipment. You don't need obviously top tier equipment. Like you said, we started a lot of them on Zoom, literally, and it was good quality. Obviously, you want it as high as possible, but when you're starting out, just getting on, just learning the actual skill of actually just communicating, it's hard. It is hard. When I chatted with Mike, I was like, actually keeping the conversation going is a whole nother skill in itself. So yeah, and then also one thing that we use, which I think has made it the whole process much easier, is podcast.co. So it's a software that basically you just upload your podcast, you upload your episode to, and then it distributes it to all the platforms just with one click. And I know there's others out there that people use, so it's just making sure you use the one that's relevant for them. But yeah, I think that has just made the process much easier.
So we've got made the decision, okay, we're doing a podcast, but to do that, it's committing to that consistent launch deadline. So whether that's, we've gone for every Monday.
Yep.
But we haven't done every Monday, and then to be honest, that's, initially when we missed the first Monday, I was a bit like, the world's going to end. But I'll tell you what, nothing happened.
No.
I think the first year we did every Monday bar Christmas week, 2 weeks. And then, life, business, business has got to run, and things, holidays and sickness and things like that. There's been the odd time where I've gone, or even 3 weeks ago, I messaged you and said, Carrianne, I've got COVID. And you were like, what? We had two people booked in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was people we know very well in the team and things like that. So, I had to sort of throw you under the bus that day, didn't I? And a couple of other colleagues to step in. But it was fantastic, so we've mixed up the podcast with different hosts and things, and that's the format I'm hoping we're gonna keep promoting. But we've got that consistency of launch. But if the odd day doesn't fly, it's not the end of the world. But really try to your darndest to stick to that. And then that quality of that audio, and I think people get a bit wrapped up in the tech. I know I get a bit obsessed with things being like true good, if you like, and then I don't do. But I think, for circa 50, 60 quid, a good microphone, we launched with a snowball mic that I'd had for about 6 years, and my MacBook, which is the same MacBook I've got sat here, and then we got locked down. I'm in my kitchen. I've got this MacBook on a stack of books, so it's eye level, rather than me looking down to the camera angle. I'm in my kitchen. I've got my snowball mic. But we've got, you organise some of the biggest names in SEO, which really sort of jump-started. And I think that's the other side, the sort of guest booking. I think some people can overcomplicate it, think, I'm never going to get any guests, but everyone's just people, aren't they?
Yeah, we're all human, aren't they?
Yeah.
The people that you look up to, you're like, oh my God, they're still human. Like, they want to help people, they want to learn, and they want to share their mission as well.
I mean, we've had some just incredible guests, superstars in our eyes in the industry. But I think listening to the podcast, when you think about your industry, no matter what you sell, there's going to be some stars, if you like, to you, that are your sort of heroes in the industry. I know I've got very many in the SEO and the digital marketing space, and the majority that have been on the podcast. And when you get them on, it's just having a chat with them like a mate, because you know the industry well. So you've got a lot of, whatever industry you're in, you're going to no doubt know it very well. Like we know our industry well, and so it's just great conversation and you find actually what a nice chap sort of thing, or a lady or whatnot. So any top tips for getting guests then?
I think it's much easier if you've already got the relationship with them, and also if you can ask them in person. I find you get a much better response rate. So obviously if you're at an event, just literally go up to their stand or anything and just ask them.
Don't leave till they say yes.
Just by please, pretty please, and also use your connections that might have already been on the podcast. So, for example, our first guest, which you were sort of luring to, was Greg Gifford, who is an incredible human being in SEO. And I literally just messaged him on LinkedIn and he replied. And Andy, honestly, he's our head of technical. He was like proper fangirling. He was like, I can't believe you had Greg.
He's a proper fan.
Yeah. But recently, I just reached back out to him. What was that? Like, say 3 years ago?
Yeah.
I emailed him literally a couple of months ago, like, hey, can you introduce me to anyone at SEMrush? And he did. And then we've just recently obviously had someone from SEMrush on the podcast. So yeah, just using that and that network was really powerful. But
it's like so you've got a guest on, you've stopped the recording, and obviously then you have a little chat about depending on whether what you want to talk about. But hey, podcast guest, anybody you think would enjoy coming on the podcast as well. So each guest could potentially recommend a guest or two, and typically, most of the guests are pretty well connected if they're a speaker or an authority in the niche or a supplier or a tech or most people that will probably come on know then somebody else by the nature of the role they're in, and it sort of spirals. Because some weeks we had some fun and games where we've got their podcast, we've got their podcast. It's like it's a Wednesday, we've got no podcast that goes live on a Monday. We've had those days, so we've had those days. You will have those days, but you either obviously try and find somebody, or you might have to miss the odd week. Obviously, you don't really want to do that, and we don't really encourage that. But the world won't end. But I think that launch piece. So would you recommend having so many podcasts in the bank for launching a podcast?
Always, I think you should always have podcasts in the bank throughout the whole sort of process. It just massively decreases the pressure and the worry, and you can make sure that the quality and the whole marketing behind it is much more strategized as well. One thing that I did do once when I tried to get a guest on was I actually contacted the sort of like customer support of a retailer, and I just contacted them like, hi, got a podcast, interested in getting your sort of head of digital on, and they actually did forward me the email of the head of digital. So that was one sort of other tactic that I did, which is a bit different, but obviously, like I say, it's better to tie on connections. But I think we started with 5 in the bank from memory. But I would always say aim to have at least a month's worth of podcasts in the bank for sure.
It's like that, isn't it? Because I know some months we've had not, all weeks we've had none, and then other weeks we've had 7 or 8, and it's almost a bit too much because you're talking about something now live, and if it doesn't go live for 2 months, it can lose its that relationship you built in the hour with the guest. So I think 4 weeks is a good spot. Good spot. Gives you time to prepare for a launch. So, we get asked, going back to that sort of commercial side, also ultimately we've got to grease the wheels of commerce and, and pay the bills, But normally, I think, from building the relationships, obviously different commercial things can happen, whether that's referrals, a recommendation, a new supplier, an idea, but ultimately, with podcasts, you can get sponsors. I know from the early days, fairly early on, we got DMs saying, can we sponsor the podcast? And we've been very careful as we are selecting tech partners and who we work with and who we refer to. We're pretty selective. We've got that, luxury where, we've had a few people say, can we sponsor the podcast? And we've gone, that doesn't really fit with our sort of ethos or our sort of brand. So we've said no. But then probably... I think circa about a year-ish ago, we was like, right, we really want to up the game on the podcast. But ultimately, there is a substantial cost when you start having studios and full-time people and producers and things like that. So obviously having sponsorship helps, that contributes to that or more than contributes to that. Any advice about getting a sort of sponsorship, and how did you secure our sponsorship?
Yeah, so it's a great story. I think there's 2 ways which you can really monetize a podcast. Obviously, we've gone the sponsorship route, which I'll sort of really go into in a second. But the other one is like a sort of tiered system, which I think works really well. So it's obviously we've got the podcast, we've got we release 1 episode a week. But what you can do is you can have different tiers of your sort of audience where they pay you, I don't know, like £5 a month or £10 a month, and they get sort of extra added value. So they might get sort of an extra podcast release. They might get access to a community Slack channel of sort of experts in that sort of field. And I think that's definitely something that's really worth investigating for sort of monetizing it. Sort of it's completely scalable. Whereas sponsorship, obviously, you get a set amount and they expect a certain amount of return, which is obviously fantastic, and it's allowed us to grow. But we actually sort of started the process by sort of reaching out to our sort of partners that we sort of built those relationships with, and we created a whole sort of proposal outlining the benefit and the opportunity that sponsorship has, because it really does get you in front of the people that you want to get in front of in that one-to-one sort of conversation. So yeah, we created a really in-depth proposal which had the opportunities. It also told them what they got from the sponsorship, so what return they was expecting to get, and obviously just much more detail in that sort of sense. And then we went to our partners, but unfortunately that was looking really promising, but they basically then shifted their focus from sort of brand awareness to sort of more lead generation. So there was a lot obviously going on in the industry at the time as well. So they started to put all their budgets into events. Really was actually like roundtables and stuff like that. But they thoroughly believed in the opportunity. They said obviously potentially maybe something in the future, which is obviously very exciting. But what we then did is we just created a LinkedIn post and just pushed it out there. And then this amazing guy called Birch from PriceInc, he'd been following us and our activities for a while, so seeing the podcast, seeing our marketing, seeing the agency growth, and he identified that we fit his business very well. So he's a competitor pricing software, and obviously we a lot of our agencies Google shopping, so that works really well. Obviously we have eCommerce, and he really wanted to make a mark in the sort of UK market and build his brand. So we worked with him really closely to really shape exactly obviously what he wanted and what benefited us. With obviously he got the podcast sponsorship, but he also got event sponsorship, and obviously was able to have those conversations with our clients to help him grow his business and us grow the sort of podcast as well. So it's really, I think it's really showcasing the opportunity to the potential sponsor and really showing them the return that they can get from the sort of get-go.
Yeah, what an answer, eh? That's a lot of stuff.
Yes.
But I think if you're a brand listening now, it's not as simple as, we've had 50 listens or we've had 100 listens or 1,000 listens. You know, it's what potentially is one of those listens worth to a potential sponsor. Yeah. So for us, it's just as an example, you know, if somebody was listening to this podcast and we recommended a platform to somebody to re-platform, a re-platform might be $5,000. It won't be $5,000, but it might be £1 million re-platform. Well, £1 million re-platform, obviously there's a lot of money being made, not by us, but, you know, by the platforms and the development. So that one lead potential, you know, is a massive, massive fee for somebody. So I think don't underestimate a small group. You know, you see these massive podcasts, you know, and podcasters that have got, you know, number one on iTunes, 5 million views a month. Don't worry about that. In your niche, in your bubble, in your niche, you know, which is what we've found. We know that one referral from our podcast, you know, I know it will equate to hundreds of thousands of pounds in theory for the right. So when you're thinking about your podcast listeners, you know, that you're going to launch potentially, or you're thinking about, you know, what would one lead, and then how you're going to package that sponsorship up. It's not just about, as Carrianne mentioned, it's not just about that mentions on the podcast. You know, we mention our sponsor on all the collateral, the episode, but then we package that up with we have an event schedule. So you go to ecom1.com/events, I believe. Yeah. You'll find a series of events. If you're listening to this, we've got a big event coming up in January the 24th at Lincolnshire Cathedral for e-commerce stores. Going to be about 50 stores, 5 or 6 tech partners. So for the partners and the people that are involved in the sponsorship, they're involved in that event and they get access to, you know, that event, that sort of wow day that's going to be an industry day. And we're going to have 50, 60 or 50 agents, 50 merchants there. So that's just packaging up something with the podcast. So if you're an eCom store, how we're going to package up sponsorship, they can have ownership on certain categories and subcategories and emails and email headers. And, if you've got a big email database and you're putting your brands in that email, you can package that up within there as well.
Yeah, I think as well, what you've got to think about is what adds value to your audience and your listeners. You don't just want to be getting sponsors from anything that will just annoy them and they'll just be, oh, for God's sake, they're just trying to sell to me again. Humans are so smart nowadays. They get so bombarded all the time with so much marketing, and they're not stupid. So if you're just getting sort of sponsors that aren't relevant to them, they just sort of switch off. So when you're sort of matching up, you've really got to make sure that the sponsor is right for your listeners.
We will probably have 5 requests to sponsor for one that we may take, or the 2 that we may take. I think it comes down to protecting the brand, working with people you want to work with, for product services that you sort of live by and work and you like. And so I think final question on the podcasting, and then we'll move on. So there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of podcasts out there. Is. I saw the top 40 e-commerce podcasts. When we started this, there was like 6 of us.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to those guys where, is it a saturated market when it comes to podcasting?
It's obviously, it's very competitive. It is like anything. It is really competitive, but there's still an opportunity there. 100%. There's obviously, as long as your content and your sort of audience is good, people want to listen to it. They want to hear different perspectives. They want to learn about new different things. So it's just really about identifying the opportunity that's relevant to your business, and also understanding that it will take a long time. And I always think if you imagine if you're in a room with someone and there's like 100 people here and you're doing a talk for an hour, that's incredible. But that's effectively what you're doing at a much greater scale through a podcast. If you've got 1,000 downloads of an episode, that episode took you obviously 1 hour to record, probably the team about a day to edit and push live. But 1,000 people, that's incredible. And those are the sort of things and the way you sort of need to think.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
If you imagine standing on stage and talking to 1,000 people, that's quite potentially a scary thing. We're to sit here now, me and you having this conversation, and thousands of people won't hear this. It's pretty bad, isn't it? Where I say, Carrianne, can you just jump on that stage and talk podcasting and sponsorship and partnerships to these 1,000 people?
10,000, 100.
It's a whole different thing. But ultimately, as a for me, marketing, when I'm asked what is marketing, what's the purpose of marketing, it's about getting people talking about your brand. Well, if you're on a podcast and 1,000 people, or whether it's 100, 1,000, 1 million, no, that's not us, but thousands of people listen to our episodes. It's a powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, you're literally in their ear on the sort of like day-to-day activity. Like, that's so intimate and that's so powerful. Like, obviously, if you're on social media, people are just scrolling, aren't they? So it's not as meaningful as podcasting as a sort of digital marketing channel.
So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
But I can't help but think, as a marketing manager listening to this, they've got a lot on. It's probably I love to see these job ads. Marketing manager required, must know SEO, PPC, podcasting. Yeah. Like, hang on, that's 9 roles in one. What would you say is the most important aspect of being a marketing manager for an e-com store, a brand?
I think it comes down to prioritization. I think that's the most important part, and the strategy behind it. So it's looking at what actually generates the results that you're after. You can do 1,000,001 different things. You can be on TikTok. I could spend my whole week creating TikTok videos, but at the end of the day, that's not going to get us the leads that we require to grow our business, like creating really in-depth educational events, like you say, the one on the 24th of January. So it's really prioritizing where you need to spend your time, spend your resource, and spend your budget to really make and get results, and build your brand, and then also generate sort of new clients as well.
I guess we know the answer to this question in our business, but what is the number one thing in your business? I'm not going to say what it is on this podcast. We'll save that for another episode. But But as myself and Carrianne are on the management team here in the business, and then 3 other people are in the management team, and we have one thing that is key to the success of this business. So, there's 100 things that Carrianne could be doing, and a marketing manager could be doing, and somebody involved in marketing. But what's the one thing? Something for you guys to have a think about, and I think what's going on about. But book recommendation, as you know, every episode.
This is such a surprise.
168 recommendations. I think somebody said, no, I'm not going to recommend a book. I'm going to recommend a film. I was like, okay.
Yeah, a bit different, yeah.
What book would you recommend to our listeners?
So mine's a bit of a different one, to be fair, and it's something I've just recently read, but it's The Myth of Normal. So it's by, I can never pronounce his name. It's like Gabe Matt. He's like a physician. So basically it's about how stress can impact your body, and how sort of dealt with trauma impacts your body, your health, and sort of your quality of life. So it's really interesting. And one thing that I found really fascinating was the amount of autoimmune diseases which were caused by like childhood sort of development. But I think, and stress as well, the impact that they can have on your whole entire life. So having better sort of coping mechanisms with that. But it's really good for sort of life development, and also just obviously nobody wants to be stressed, and we live in a very sort of stressful, busy environment. So you want to have those sort of skills and that sort of mindset to not obviously impact your health negatively.
Well, I've got a trip coming up, so I might add that to the reading list as we go.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much. That has been fantastic. Thank you.
No, thank you.
For those that want to find out more about what you do at eComOne, what we do at eComOne, maybe those aspiring marketeers and marketing, managers, we're very open with our sharing and knowledge in the agency. And maybe those brands that think they're possibly a fit for sponsorship. What's the best way to reach out to you, Carrianne?
So I would say connect with me on LinkedIn. So it's Carrianne Dukes, RRN. Everyone always spells my name wrong. But you should pretty much be able to find me. Or email me on carrianne@ecomone.com.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
No, thank you, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast. So you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you on the next one.